Just before my brother's wedding, my mother cornered me. She pressed a cheap, starched servant's apron into my hands and whispered, "You're not family, Haley. You're a guest worker. Now make yourself useful." She thought she was demoting a disobedient daughter. She had no idea she was speaking to a 2-star general, and the secret owner of the very ground she stood on. Her eviction notice was already drafted. My name is Major General Haley Whitman. I am 37 years old, and I was driving home. The wheels of my Ford Explorer whispered over the asphalt, carrying me through the perfectly manicured streets of McLean, Virginia. It was autumn, and the old maples formed a canopy of gold and crimson, a beautiful, fiery ceiling over a world that had long ceased to feel like my own. Each turn was familiar, yet foreign. After years in the dust of Afghanistan and the sterile corridors of the Pentagon, this suburban opulence felt like a foreign country. Then the house came into view. It stood as it always had, an imposing colonial revival mansion, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun, its perfect lawn a carpet of emerald green. The white picket fence, meant to look welcoming, always felt more like a barrier to me, a line separating their world from mine. I parked, killed the engine, and took a breath. The silence in the car was a comfortable friend. The silence I was about to walk into would be a weapon. I used my own key to let myself in. The air inside was cool and still, smelling faintly of lemon polish and money. No one called out a greeting. My eyes went immediately to the grand foyer wall, to the space where a photograph of me, ramrod straight and beaming with pride on my West Point graduation day, used to hang. It was gone. In its place hung a massive, oil-painted portrait of my mother, Eleanor, and my younger brother, Liam. They were posed at some charity gala, my mother draped in silk, my brother in a tailored tuxedo, their smiles radiating a practiced, effortless success. I had been erased. Eleanor emerged from the living room, a glass of pale gold Chardonnay in her hand. She was with a woman in a severe black pantsuit, the wedding planner, I presumed. My mother's eyes, the same blue as my own but colder, swept over me from head to toe. Her gaze lingered on my simple jeans and sweater, a silent, thorough assessment that found me lacking. Then she spoke, her voice loud enough for the planner to hear, a performance of casual dismissal. "Haley, your room is upstairs next to the storage room. You can get your own towels from the linen closet." She turned away without another word, resuming her conversation about floral arrangements, as if I were a delivery person who had just dropped off a package. I stood there for a moment in the marble-floored entryway, a ghost in the house I grew up in. That evening, the performance continued. The house filled with the low murmur of power, the sound of my mother's inner circle. They were a curated collection of Washington, D.C.'s elite, politicians, lobbyists, and business titans, all sipping my mother's expensive wine and trading influence. I tried to make conversation, to find some neutral territory, but I felt like an anthropologist studying a strange alien tribe. That's when Eleanor approached me, her smile fixed and brilliant, a politician's weapon. She pressed something crisp and white into my hand. An apron. "Haley, darling," she said, her voice a sweet, poisonous melody. "You're not familiar with most of the people here, I know. How about you help the staff with the hors d'oeuvres? You're used to serving, after all, aren't you?" The words hung in the air, a public indictment. A few of the nearby guests offered stifled, polite chuckles. I glanced over at Liam. He stood talking to a senator, and upon hearing our mother's words, he simply shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture, before turning back to his conversation about his latest architectural project. He was an accomplice in his indifference. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck, burning my face. In that moment, I wasn't a major general in the United States Army. The 2 stars on my shoulders, earned through sweat, blood, and sleepless nights, felt like they had been stripped away. I was just a helper, a prop, an inconvenience in a pristine white apron. The final cut came a few minutes later. A woman with a kind face, one of Eleanor's friends from a charity board, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could form a reply, Eleanor swooped in, placing a proprietary hand on my arm. "Oh, she has some sort of administrative job for the government," my mother announced brightly, as if discussing a mildly interesting hobby. "Very stable, but a bit dry." Administrative. The word was a calculated insult, designed to sandpaper my career down to something small, boring, and unimpressive. The feeling of being erased was now complete. My throat tightened, the air suddenly thick and hard to breathe. I was invisible, a servant whose only purpose was to not get in the way of the real family. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded to the kind woman, extricated myself from my mother's grasp, and walked away from the glittering party. My steps were steady as I moved through the house and into the quiet sanctuary of the kitchen. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind me. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I untied the apron strings. I held the starchy white fabric in my hand for a second, then let it drop into the stainless steel trash can, right on top of a pile of discarded lemon peels. It wasn't an act of anger, it was a silent declaration of war. Sleep did not come easily that night. In the sterile silence of the guest room, the room next to the storage room, the image of the white apron falling into the trash replayed in my mind. It was a clean, sharp memory, but it was muddled by a single echoing question that had haunted me for 2 decades. "Why, Mom? Why do you hate what I am so much?" There was only one place I could go to even begin to find an answer. Before dawn, I was back in my Ford Explorer, driving through the sleeping suburbs towards Arlington National Cemetery. A thin, ethereal mist clung to the ground, softening the edges of the world. The air was crisp and carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Here, the silence was different. It wasn't the weaponized silence of my mother's house. It was a blanket of reverence, a profound quiet that held the weight of countless stories of service and sacrifice. I walked through the sea of white marble headstones, each one a testament to a life lived for something greater than oneself. I found his marker easily. The grass around it was perfectly trimmed. Marcus Whitman, Colonel, United States Army. I stood before the cold white stone, my breath pluming in the chilly air. This was the only person who had ever truly seen me. Not the difficult daughter, not the oddity, but me. Closing my eyes, I could almost feel the cool Virginia night air from years ago. I was a girl again, sitting on the back porch with my father, our heads tilted up towards the vast, inky canvas of the sky. He wasn't just showing me the constellations. He was teaching me to navigate. His finger, strong and steady, would trace the patterns in the sky. "Eleanor only sees the brightest stars, Haley," he'd said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "She likes things that glitter, things that announce themselves. But a true soldier, a true navigator, knows it's the dimmer stars, the ones you have to search for, that guide you when you're lost in the dark. Be a dim star, honey. Be quiet, be constant, and never lose your heading." His words were a ghost, a comforting presence in the morning mist. He understood her, and by extension, He understood my place in her universe. I was not a bright star. I was not meant for her sky. A flood of memories, sharp and painful, broke through the calm. The day my acceptance letter from West Point arrived. It was a thick, important-looking envelope. I had held it in my hands, my heart hammering with a joy so pure it felt like it could lift me off the ground. I showed it to Eleanor. She took it, her perfectly manicured fingers barely touching the paper, and tossed it onto the mahogany dining table as if it were junk mail. "You're ruining your life, Haley," she had declared, her voice devoid of warmth. "You'll become hard and coarse. No decent man from McLean will want to marry a soldier." There was no pride, no congratulations, just a verdict, a life sentence. That same week, my brother, Liam, won a regional school art competition. A simple ribbon and a certificate. For that, Eleanor threw a lavish party in the backyard. She invited over 100 guests. There were caterers, a string quartet, and champagne. All for a child's drawing. The injustice of it burned in my memory. But my father, my quiet, constant star, had found a way. He'd snuck me out of the house that evening, away from the tinkling laughter and forced smiles. He drove us into D.C. to Ben's Chili Bowl, a loud, wonderfully chaotic place that was a universe away from my mother's curated world. We sat at the counter, and he ordered us his favorite thing on the menu: 2 chili half-smokes, sizzling hot and smothered in their famous chili. The greasy, delicious, unpretentious meal was the most meaningful celebration of my life. As I ate, he'd looked at me, his eyes full of the pride my mother had denied me. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you your dreams aren't worth celebrating," he'd said, his voice firm over the diner's happy clamor. "Not ever." Now, standing at his grave, the memory was so vivid I could almost taste the chili. The contrast between my father's quiet validation and my mother's loud disapproval was the blueprint of my childhood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a challenge coin from my old unit. It was heavy and cool in my palm. It was a soldier's tradition, a small token of respect and remembrance left for a fallen comrade. I leaned down and placed it carefully on top of the smooth, cold marble of his headstone. The metal made a soft, definitive click against the stone. I whispered into the quiet air, my words meant for him alone. "Dad, I'm not lost. I'm just in the dark right now. But I remember your lesson. I remember the stars." I took a deep, steadying breath. It's time I learned to be my own guide star, even if no one else can see the light. A new resolve settled in my heart. It wasn't the hot fire of revenge. It was something colder, stronger. It was a determination to honor his legacy, to reclaim the definition of service and honor that my mother had tried so hard to tarnish. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and turned away from the grave. The morning mist was beginning to burn off, and the first rays of sunlight were piercing through the trees, glinting off the endless rows of white. I was walking out of the shadows, and I knew the path ahead would be my own. The path of a dim star, my father had called it. Driving away from Arlington, I realized that my entire adult life had been lived on that path. It was a journey paved not with my mother's approval or my brother's easy successes, but with sweat, mud, and the stony silence of my family. The memories came back not as a gentle stream, but as a series of sharp, vivid snapshots. West Point, the endless nights spent shivering in the cold, wet mud during field exercises, my muscles screaming in protest, the grueling physical trials that pushed me to the edge of collapse, my lungs burning, my vision tunneling. I remember the subtle, corrosive condescension from some of the male cadets, the quiet shock on their faces when I not only kept up, but surpassed them in tactical simulations. Their surprise was a quiet fuel, burning alongside my father's memory. Each small victory was a silent affirmation that I was on the right path, even if it was a lonely one. Then Afghanistan. The memories shifted from the green hills of New York to the beige, dusty landscapes of Helmand Province. I was a young first lieutenant then, leading a patrol through a remote village. The air was a constant companion, thick with dust, tension, and the ever-present threat of danger. My world was the weight of my gear, the feel of my rifle in my hands, and the faces of the soldiers who trusted me with their lives. I learned a new language there, a language unspoken. I learned to read a person's intent not in their words, but in the flicker of their eyes, in the posture of their shoulders, in the charged silence between two distant gunshots. These were lessons in human nature, in survival, that no Ivy League university could ever teach my brother, Liam. He learned about aesthetics and structure. I learned about life and death. One memory from that time remains a permanent, unhealed scar on my soul. It was Christmas time. I was in Kandahar at a makeshift forward operating base, just hours after an ambush had cost me a good soldier. A young man from Ohio with a picture of his high school sweetheart taped inside his helmet. I was bone-weary, grieving, and a million miles from anything that felt like home. I managed to get a video call through. The screen flickered to life, revealing our family living room in McLean. It was a scene from a holiday card, a towering, brilliantly lit Christmas tree, Eleanor and Liam laughing, glasses of eggnog in their hands. They were surrounded by warmth, comfort, and safety. My mother's smile faltered when she saw me. My face was caked in grime, my eyes hollow with exhaustion. She sighed, a sound of faint annoyance. "Oh goodness, Haley, you look dreadful. Are you eating properly?" That was her first question. Not, "Are you safe?" Not, "Are you okay?" Liam leaned into the frame, his face beaming. "Hey sis, Mom just got me a new BMW for my promotion." The words struck me with physical force. A new car. A man I considered a brother was dead, and my own brother was celebrating a luxury vehicle. No one asked about the firefight. No one asked about my men. Suddenly, a siren blared on my end, the unmistakable sound of an incoming rocket attack. I had to go. The last thing I heard before I cut the connection was my mother's voice, turning to Liam, completely unfazed. "Come on, let's go pick out your outfit for the golf club party." The screen went black, leaving me in the deafening roar of the siren and an even more deafening silence in my heart. Now, years later, I sat in the anonymous comfort of a Starbucks not far from that very house. The smell of roasted coffee beans and pastries was a world away from the dust of Kandahar. I had my encrypted government laptop open, the quiet hum of its fan a familiar sound. I scrolled through my inbox, a digital testament to the life my family refused to see. There was an email with an official invitation to be a keynote speaker at an international security conference in London. Another was a commendation from the Pentagon on an intelligence brief I had authored, a brief that had directly influenced national policy. My work had weight, it had meaning, it was recognized at the highest levels. I took a sip of my black coffee. A bitter smile touched my lips. The world saw me as a general, a strategist, a leader. I was respected by my peers and trusted by my superiors. But in the magnificent colonial house, just a few miles down the road, I was still the girl who wasn't good enough, the one who wasn't worth a celebration. the one who was best suited to wear an apron and serve the real guests. The world saw a general, but my family saw a ghost, a useful but ultimately invisible one. I was still sitting in that Starbucks, the bitter smile lingering on my lips as I stared at the commendation from the Pentagon on my laptop screen. The world saw me, but my family didn't. The familiar ache of that truth was settling in when a new email popped into my inbox. The subject line was simple, coffee, but it was the sender's name that made my heart skip a beat. Ava Russo, I knew that name, Captain Ava Russo. My brother Liam's fiancée. I read the email. It was short and to the point, suggesting a meeting at a coffee shop in DuPont Circle. No explanation, just a time and a place. My instincts, honed by years of assessing threats, told me this was not a social call. This was reconnaissance. The next day, I found the small, independent coffee shop tucked away on a quiet side street. It was the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, a world away from the sterile perfection of my mother's home. Ava was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. In civilian clothes, a simple sweater and jeans, she looked different, but she still carried herself with the unmistakable posture of a soldier. She stood up as I approached. "General," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Captain," I replied, taking the seat opposite her. "Thank you for meeting me." She didn't waste time on small talk. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "Ma'am, I know what's happening with your mother, with Eleanor." She said my mother's name with a clinical distance. "She's always been like this. I need you to know that I'm not part of it." I just listened, my expression neutral. She continued, leaning forward slightly. "A year ago, after Liam started boasting about his family's success, I ran a background check on you, a professional verification. I know who you are, General. I served under your command in Kandahar. You pulled my unit out of an ambush in the Arghandab Valley. You saved my life." A jolt went through me. I remembered the firefight, but in the chaos of command, individual faces often blurred. To her, it was the day she lived. To me, it was a Tuesday. For the first time, I saw not my brother's fiancée, but a fellow soldier. A deep, unexpected warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. "I owe you everything," she said, her voice thick with conviction. "So whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm your soldier, on any battlefield. And that includes this one." The sincerity in her eyes was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone in the foxhole. Ava had one more piece of intelligence. "There's someone you need to see," she said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It had a name and an address in Alexandria. "Dr. Maya Singh. She's retired now, but she knows your mother, and she's a friend." The next day, I drove to the address. It was a discreet brownstone office. The plaque on the door simply said, "M. Singh, Consultant." Inside, it was nothing like a therapist's office. There were no soft couches or inspirational posters. It was a war room. Maps of various global hotspots were pinned to one wall. A large whiteboard, covered in complex diagrams and notes, dominated another. A powerful-looking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver-streaked black hair rose from behind a large desk. This was Dr. Maya Singh. She was an American woman of Indian descent, but she moved with the calm authority of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating the corridors of power in D.C. She had been a top strategist for the Defense Intelligence Agency. "General Whitman," she said, her voice warm but businesslike. Ava called ahead. "Please, sit. Tea?" As she poured 2 cups of Earl Grey, she got straight to the point. I've known Eleanor Whitman for 30 years, from various boards and committees. I've watched her operate. Maya looked me directly in the eye. This isn't just a family squabble, Haley. Your mother isn't just attacking your feelings. She's conducting a systematic campaign of information warfare to erase your identity and seize your father's legacy. And we are going to fight back with the same weapons, truth and precision. The word "we" resonated in the quiet room. Maya opened a desk drawer and placed 2 small items on the polished wood between us: a digital voice recorder, no bigger than a tube of lipstick, and a black encrypted USB drive. Your mother operates on manipulation and lies spoken in private, Maya said, her voice steel. From now on, you gather intelligence, record everything, document everything. We are building a case, your case. That evening, the 3 of us met in Maya's war room. A major general, a captain, and a retired DIA strategist, a chosen family forged in shared purpose. There were no tears, no emotional hand-wringing. We talked tactics. Ava, using her access, pulled up the floor plans and security system schematics for the wedding venue. Maya started outlining a timeline, identifying key players on the guest list: journalists, politicians, influential figures who could turn the tide. I provided the ground truth, the history of my mother's actions, the psychological profile of my opponent. For the first time, I felt the tide beginning to turn. The lonely path of the dim star was no longer a solo mission. A new constellation was forming. We were drawing up a battle plan to dismantle Eleanor Whitman's empire. Not with anger, but with cold, hard facts. It was a campaign fueled by military precision, intelligence expertise, and the unshakable loyalty of soldiers. The fight for my father's legacy and my own had begun. 2 days after our strategy session in Maya's war room, my mother called. Her voice over the phone was unnaturally warm, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me since I was a child. She wanted to have dinner, just the 2 of us, a chance to reconnect before the wedding madness. My internal alarms blared. This was a tactical move, but Maya's words echoed in my mind. Gather intelligence. This was my first opportunity. I'd like that, I said, my own voice carefully neutral. Before leaving my temporary apartment, I took out the small, sleek voice recorder Maya had given me. With a quiet click, I activated it and slipped it into my clutch. I was no longer just a daughter going to dinner. I was an operative heading into hostile territory. Eleanor had chosen the Inn at Little Washington. It was a legendary 3 Michelin star restaurant, nestled in the Virginia countryside, a place of extreme luxury and hushed tones. It was also incredibly public, a favorite haunt of senators and CEOs. A strategic choice. She knew I wouldn't make a scene there. The entire evening was a carefully constructed stage. She was already seated when I arrived, looking impeccable in a silk dress, a single strand of pearls at her throat. She smiled, a dazzling public relations smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Haley, darling, you look, well," she said, her gaze flicking over my simple black dress, a subtle judgment in the pause. The meal was a masterpiece of culinary art. Dish after dish arrived, each one a tiny, exquisite sculpture on a plate. A carpaccio of herb-crusted baby lamb with Caesar salad ice cream, a pan-seared sea scallop with a black truffle vinaigrette. Between bites of food that tasted of nothing, Eleanor performed. She spoke of the importance of family, of how we needed to stand united. She reminisced about my childhood, cherry-picking vague, happy moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She told me she had always been proud of my career, even if she didn't always know how to show it. It was a brilliant performance, a monologue of manufactured warmth and counterfeit sentiment. Every word was a lie, a carefully polished stone laid on a path leading somewhere I knew I didn't want to go. The air grew thick with her insincerity. I felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I wasn't having dinner with my mother. I was being interrogated by a master manipulator. Then, with the arrival of the dessert course, a stunning 7-layer coconut cake, came the main event. Eleanor reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a neatly clipped folder of documents. She slid it across the white tablecloth, placing it right next to my plate. The casualness of the gesture was chilling. "Just a small matter of paperwork, dear," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, light as a feather. "To consolidate the family assets, it will make things so much easier to manage. And it will help Liam tremendously with his business ventures after the wedding. All you have to do is sign right here." My gaze fell to the folder. My heart began to pound, a hard, steady drum against my ribs. This wasn't about consolidation. This was an ambush. I could feel the weight of the small recorder in my clutch. I could hear Maya's voice, a clear, sharp command in my head. "Never sign anything without your lawyer reviewing it." I opened the folder. The pages were dense with impenetrable legal jargon, but certain phrases jumped out: relinquish all claims, transfer of title, irrevocable. This wasn't a consolidation, this was a surrender. This was an act of erasure, an attempt to sever me from the last physical piece of my father I had left, his house. The blood rushed in my ears. She was trying to steal my father's legacy from me over a plate of expensive cake. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying myself. I closed the folder and gently pushed it back across the table toward her. "I think I'll need my lawyer to look this over first, Mother." The effect was instantaneous. Eleanor's perfect practiced smile froze and then crumbled. Her eyes, which had been feigning warmth all evening, turned to chips of ice. The mask was off. "A lawyer?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous, a stark contrast to the elegant surroundings. "Haley, we are family. Don't you trust your own mother?" The classic manipulation. The appeal to a bond she herself had spent a lifetime destroying. "This is a simple family matter. Don't be difficult and complicated. Just sign it." Her hand darted out, her fingers pressing down on the folder, an order disguised as a suggestion. I looked at her hand, then back up at her face, contorted now with a barely concealed fury. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt or shame. I felt a cold, clear-eyed clarity. The game was revealed. I stood up slowly, my movements calm and measured. I took $100 bill from my clutch and placed it on the table, more than enough to cover my share and the tip. "I'll have my lawyer send it back to you once he's reviewed it," I said, my voice even and steady. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel her enraged stare burning into my back. As I crossed the dining room, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The hushed conversations of the other diners, the clinking of silverware, the entire bubble of manufactured civility faded away. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew one thing for certain. The battle had officially begun, and I had just fired the first shot. The moment I stepped back into my temporary apartment after the dinner with Eleanor, I acted. There was no time for hesitation. My hands were steady as I took out my phone, laid the legal documents flat on the coffee table, and photographed each page. I sent the images to Maya in a secure message with a simple heading: "Tonight's dinner conversation." Then I sat and waited, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. The audio file from the recorder was already uploading to our shared encrypted drive. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Maya. Her voice, usually so calm and strategic, was laced with cold fury. "Haley, I've had my legal contact review these photos. This isn't a power of attorney. This is a full, unconditional waiver of your inheritance rights to the house. It's ironclad. She had it drawn up by a lawyer who specializes in contentious family disputes. She was trying to trick you into signing away your father's home." A wave of nausea washed over me. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to have it confirmed, in such brutal legal terms. She had intended to strip me of everything. As if on cue, a text message alert pinged. It was from Ava. There was no text, just a link. My finger trembled slightly as I tapped it. The link took me to a well-known local Virginia society blog, the kind that chronicles the lives of the wealthy and powerful in the D.C. area. The headline seemed to leap off the screen, written in a bold, sanctimonious font. "The Whitman Family and the Prodigal Daughter, a Sad Tale." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. Anonymously sourced, but clearly fed by Eleanor, it painted me as a difficult and reclusive daughter who had abandoned her family to pursue a vague and unsettling career. It insinuated, with practiced insidiousness, that my time in the military had left me with psychological issues, making me unstable and prone to jealousy over my brother's impending marriage. It claimed I was actively trying to cause trouble for his wedding. But the worst part, the part that made the blood freeze in my veins, was the picture. They had found an old photo of me, taken right after a grueling 72-hour mission in a combat zone. I was exhausted, my face smudged with dirt, my eyes hollow. They had cropped it, enlarged it, and used it to illustrate their narrative of the unhinged veteran. It was a violation so profound, so personal, it stole the air from my lungs. They didn't just want to disinherit me, they wanted to utterly destroy me, to discredit me so completely that no one would ever listen to a word I said. My service, my sacrifices, the very things that had defined my life, they were twisting them into weapons to be used against me. I dropped the phone on the couch as if it were on fire. I sank into the darkness of the unlit living room, the city lights twinkling mockingly outside my window. For a moment, I felt the crushing weight of it all. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer calculated cruelty. I felt the floor give way beneath me, and then I remembered. My father's voice, talking about the dim stars, Maya's voice, telling me to fight back with truth, Ava's voice, pledging her loyalty. I was not alone in the dark. I reached for my laptop, my movements stiff at first, then more certain. I opened the web browser and typed Brené Brown, The Man in the Arena, into the search bar. I clicked on the video of her Netflix special, The Call to Courage, and fast-forwarded to the part I needed to hear. Her voice filled the silent room, strong and clear, quoting Theodore Roosevelt's timeless words. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. The critics, Eleanor, Liam, their soulless friends, the faceless blogger. They were all just critics. They were spectators sitting in the cheap seats of the arena, comfortable and safe, casting judgment on a game they were too cowardly to play. But me, I had always been in the arena. My face had been marred by the dust of Afghanistan. My hands knew the grit and the grime of the fight. I had stumbled, I had bled, and I had dared greatly. I opened my eyes. The fear was gone, the hurt was gone. All that remained was a cold, hard, crystalline clarity. The path forward was illuminated. They had pushed me out of the family, and in doing so, they had pushed me right back into the one place I truly belonged, the battlefield. And I'm sure some of you listening know exactly what that moment feels like. The moment the pain stops and the purpose begins. I picked up my phone. My hand was rock steady now. I dialed Maya's number. She answered on the first ring. "Activate everything," I said, my voice low and devoid of any emotion except for pure, unadulterated resolve. "It's time to enter my arena." My final words to Maya on the phone, "It's time to enter my arena," were not a plea. They were an executive order. The response was immediate. The next 48 hours were a blur of focused, relentless preparation. Maya's quiet office in Alexandria transformed into a full-fledged command center. The whiteboard, once covered in abstract diagrams, was now a meticulously detailed battle plan. A floor plan of the hotel ballroom was pinned in the center, marked with ingress and egress routes, camera blind spots, and optimal lines of sight. Ava, leveraging her technical skills, had procured schematics of the venue's AV system, giving us control over every microphone and projector screen in the room. We operated with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned military unit. Maya, the strategist, worked her contacts. She compiled a list of key guests, not just the powerful, but the influential. She identified 3 prominent journalists and a handful of social media influencers, known for breaking stories. A digital dossier, containing every piece of evidence we had, was prepared and encrypted, ready to be deployed at the precise moment. Maya had already briefed a trusted investigative reporter from a major national newspaper, priming him to expect a package at H-hour. Ava was my intelligence officer. She monitored online chatter, tracking the spread of the hit piece Eleanor had planted. She created a detailed timeline of events for the wedding ceremony, predicting choke points and moments of opportunity. There was no emotion, only data. Who would speak and when? Where Eleanor would be seated. The exact moment the ceremony would transition to the reception. Every detail was a potential advantage. My role was command. I made the call that would secure our most critical asset. Using a secure line, I contacted General Alistair Vance, my former commanding officer and mentor, now a 4-star general at the Pentagon. I didn't complain or offer emotional backstory. I presented the situation like a field report, a concise, factual briefing on a campaign of misinformation targeting a senior officer. "Sir, I require 2 assets," I said, my voice steady. The unredacted after-action report for Operation Desert Aegis, and a formal video confirmation of my service record and decorations from the Pentagon. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence heavy with contemplation. General Vance was a man of few words, but immense integrity. I knew he understood the unspoken context. "The files will be on a secure server for you within the hour, Major General," he finally said, his voice like gravel and steel. "It's high time the full story of what you and your soldiers did in that valley was properly recognized." He didn't ask for more details. He didn't question my motives. That was the loyalty of the uniform, a bond forged in shared duty that my mother could never comprehend. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep. The city lights of Alexandria bled through the blinds, but my focus was entirely within the four walls of my room. I had retrieved my Class A Army service uniform, the formal dress blues, from its garment bag. It was the uniform of ceremony, of tradition, of honor. Under the stark light of the desk lamp, I began the ritual of preparing my armor. I laid out the jacket and meticulously began to affix my decorations. Each medal, each ribbon was a chapter in the life my mother had tried to erase. The silver star for gallantry in action during the very ambush Ava had survived. The purple heart, a silent testament to the shrapnel that had torn through my shoulder in a different firefight. A story I'd never even tried to tell my family. The Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star. Each pin I pushed through the deep blue fabric was a memory, a fallen comrade, a sleepless night, a moment of terror, a surge of pride. They were a silent, metallic language that told the true story of my service. A story of sweat and blood, not the dry administrative fiction my mother had created. I took out my portable steamer, the hiss of the hot vapor filling the quiet room. I worked on every inch of the uniform, smoothing out every potential wrinkle, ensuring every crease was razor sharp, every line perfect. The polished brass buttons gleamed like gold coins. The 2 silver stars on each shoulder epaulette shone with a cold, hard light. This was more than just preparation, it was a transformation. I was shedding the ill-fitting costume of the difficult daughter they had tried to force upon me. I was stepping back into my own skin. When I was finished, I hung the uniform, a perfect effigy of honor and discipline. I stood before it, seeing not just a jacket, but the embodiment of my oath. Eleanor had chosen her weapons: lies, manipulation, and public shame. I had chosen mine. I wasn't getting ready for a wedding. I was preparing for a reckoning. I wasn't putting on a dress. I was putting on my armor. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in Washington, D.C. was a sea of pastel silks, tailored tuxedos, and the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. A string quartet was playing something light and classical, a delicate soundtrack for the union of 2 influential families. My brother, Liam, stood at the altar, looking handsome and confident. My mother, Eleanor, sat in the front row, the perfect image of the proud matriarch, radiating a serene, regal calm. The ceremony had just begun. The procession was over. The minister was welcoming the guests. This was H hour. As planned, the grand oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. But the person who entered was not a late-arriving guest in a flowing gown. It was me. I stepped into the room, and a shockwave of silence radiated outwards from the doorway. Every sound ceased. The music faltered, a single violin note dying in the air. The low murmur of the 300 guests evaporated. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes locked onto me. I was not wearing a dress. I was wearing my armor. The deep blue jacket of my Army service uniform was immaculate. The brass buttons gleamed, and the rows of ribbons on my chest were a vibrant testament to a life they had tried to deny. The 2 silver stars of a major general on each shoulder seemed to catch and hold the light of the chandeliers. I saw my mother's face. Her serene smile froze, then cracked like fine china dropped on a marble floor. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty chalk-white mask of horror. Beside her, Liam's jaw went slack, his confident posture crumbled, and he stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning panic. I ignored them all. With my back straight and my gaze fixed forward, I walked with a calm, measured pace down the long aisle. I didn't stop at the front. I found an empty chair in the last row, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap, becoming a quiet, formidable presence at the back of their perfect party. The ceremony sputtered back to life, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The air was thick with tension and whispered questions. The minister, flustered, rushed through the vows. When he reached the classic line, "If anyone has any objection to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace," an electric silence filled the room. No one spoke. The real objection was not to the marriage, but to the lies it was built upon. Finally, it was time for the family remarks. Eleanor, looking shaken, began to rise from her seat to deliver what I was sure would be a polished, pre-written speech. But she was too late. Someone else was already moving toward the microphone. It was the bride. Captain Ava Russo, a vision in an elegant white gown, stepped to the lectern. She looked breathtaking, but her expression was one of solemn purpose. She did not look at her groom. She did not look at the audience. She turned her body slightly, directing her attention to the last row, to me. The room held its breath. "Before I begin my new life," Ava said, her voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone, "I must first honor the person who gave me the chance to have this life at all." She straightened her shoulders. In her beautiful wedding dress, she drew herself up to a position of attention, and then, in a gesture of profound respect and loyalty, she raised her hand to her brow in a sharp, perfect military salute. "To Major General Haley Whitman," she declared. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The title, spoken with such reverence, hung in the air like a detonation. Major General. My mother's face contorted in a silent scream. Ava was not finished. She lowered her hand and continued, her voice ringing with indisputable truth. "The general, sitting in the back row, is the woman who saved my life, and the lives of 5 other soldiers during Operation Desert Aegis in Kandahar." That was the cue. At that exact moment, the massive projector screen behind the altar, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of the bride and groom's initials, flickered to life. The monogram was replaced by the unredacted after-action report of the mission, my name and rank clearly visible. Then a montage of photos, me in the field, me with my unit, me receiving the Silver Star. The screen displayed a high-resolution image of my decorations, each one named and explained. And then, the final asset, the video from General Alistair Vance. His stern, authoritative face filled the screen. In his full Class A uniform, he looked directly into the camera and confirmed my rank, my service record, and the circumstances of my commendations, his voice leaving no room for doubt. Simultaneously, as Maya hit send from her command center, the phones of every journalist in the room began to buzz and chime, a chorus of incoming alerts. The dossier was delivered. It was too much for Eleanor. Her carefully constructed world was shattering in real time, before her horrified eyes. She leapt from her seat, her composure completely gone. "Stop this!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. "This is a lie! All of it is a lie!" She lunged toward the stage, a desperate attempt to stop the unstoppable. But it was far, far too late. From the stunned silence of the crowd, a single person began to clap, then another and another. It started slowly, then grew into a wave, a thunderous rolling ovation that shook the entire ballroom. The guests were getting to their feet, not for the bride and groom, but for the soldier in the back row. They were applauding the truth. They were applauding a hero who had finally been seen. I sat perfectly still in my chair, in the heart of the storm I had unleashed, and let the sound of my vindication wash over me. In the aftermath of the thunderous applause, an unnerving silence fell within me. The adrenaline that had surged through my veins ebbed away, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. I slipped out of the ballroom unnoticed in the ensuing chaos, leaving the wreckage of my family's perfect evening behind. The battle was over, but now came the aftershocks. The next morning, the storm broke. My story was on the front page of the Washington Post, above the fold. The headline was stark: "The Invisible General, Pentagon confirms heroism of officer hidden by own family." The name stuck. I had become a phenomenon. Every major news network picked up the story. The digital dossier Maya had released went viral, and the blog post that had tried to assassinate my character was now held up as an example of malicious deceit. Eleanor's social empire did not just crack, it disintegrated overnight. The boards of the prestigious charities she chaired quietly requested her resignation. The invitations to the exclusive DC galas and fundraisers stopped coming. The powerful friends who had once flocked to her parties now avoided her calls, their loyalty as shallow as her own values. Her currency, her reputation, had been rendered worthless. The wedding, of course, was officially canceled. Ava told me she had returned the ridiculously large engagement ring to Liam that very night, leaving it on the table of the hotel suite he had booked for their wedding night. She was free. 2 days later, my brother showed up at my apartment. Liam looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was a mess, his expensive clothes were rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had seen his gilded world collapse. He stood in my doorway, not with an apology, but with an accusation. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice a ragged whisper of disbelief. "Everything. Did you have to do it like that?" I looked at my little brother, the boy I had once protected on the playground, the man I had tried to love despite the wall my mother built between us. And for the first time, I saw him with perfect, painful clarity. I saw not a victim, but a willing accomplice. I saw the weakness, the entitlement, the profound selfishness that had allowed him to stand by and watch me be erased time and time again. There was no remorse in his eyes, only self-pity. The last vestiges of sisterly affection inside me withered and died. "No, Liam," I replied, my voice calm and devoid of the anger he so clearly expected. "I didn't ruin anything, I just turned on the lights. Mom's lies and your silence, your complicity, is what ruined everything. You chose your side a long time ago." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out, like a fish out of water. He was stunned, not by my words, but by the fact that they held no anger, no room for argument. They were simply a statement of fact. I closed the door gently in his face, the soft click of the lock a definitive, final sound. It was the closing of a chapter I should have ended years ago. The final piece of business was the house, my father's house, the stage for all of Eleanor's vanities. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man recommended by Maya, drafted and sent the official notice. It wasn't an eviction. That would have been a cruel, vengeful act, and my mission was about justice, not revenge. The notice was far more strategic. It informed Eleanor that as the legal owner of the property, I would not be forcing her to leave. Instead, effective immediately, she would be required to pay monthly rent at the current fair market value for a property of that size in McLean, Virginia. It was a substantial sum. Furthermore, The document stipulated that 100% of that rent money would be paid directly from her account into a charitable trust I had established, the Colonel Marcus Whitman Legacy Fund, dedicated to providing scholarships for the children of fallen and wounded service members. My father's house would no longer be a monument to social climbing and empty prestige. It would become what he would have wanted, a true legacy of service. It would educate children. It would support families who, like mine, had sacrificed for this country. It would be a source of honor. My mother could continue to live in her palace, but now it would be a gilded cage, a constant monthly reminder of her defeat. She would be funding the very values she had spent her life despising. I had drawn my new boundary. It wasn't built of bricks and mortar, or of anger and resentment. It was built of truth, of justice, and of the law. It was a wall she could never tear down. Standing there in my quiet apartment, I finally understood what a true inheritance was. It wasn't a house, it was the strength to protect what you hold sacred. The storm passed, the news cycle moved on, and in the quiet aftermath, I began to understand the nature of peace. It wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of a quiet, internal alignment. The war for recognition was over because I no longer needed it from the outside world. Several months later, an invitation arrived that felt like a message from my father himself. I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the graduation ceremony for the United States Military Academy at West Point. Standing on that historic rostrum, looking out at the sea of cadets in their crisp gray uniforms, the long gray line, I felt my father's pride swell within me. This was the stage he had dreamed of for me. But as I looked into their young, eager faces, I knew I couldn't talk to them about conventional warfare. They would learn enough about that soon enough. So I spoke about a different kind of combat. "We train you here for the battlefields of the world," I said, my voice steady over the podium. "But I am here to tell you that sometimes the most difficult arena you will ever fight in is the one within your own home. The most courageous act is not always facing enemy fire, but speaking the truth to those who are supposed to love you. Honor is not just a word we embroider on our flags. It is a boundary you must draw to protect your own soul." Looking out at the future leaders of the Army, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost startling. I was giving them the map I never had, the one my father had tried to draw for me in the stars. When I returned to my apartment in D.C., an email was waiting for me. It wasn't from the Pentagon or a news agency. It was from a small foundation called Solace for Soldiers' Kids, a scholarship fund I had been quietly financing for years with a portion of my salary. It was my secret legacy, a quiet act of service no one knew about. The email contained a short video file. I clicked play. A young woman appeared on the screen, her face bright with a joy so radiant it was contagious. She was standing in what looked like a college dorm room, a university banner hanging on the wall behind her. "Hi," she began, a little shyly. "My name is Sarah, and my dad was Sergeant David Jensen. He was killed in action in Iraq. I was told this video might get to the anonymous donor who funded my scholarship." She took a breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I just wanted to say, thank you. My whole life people have looked at me with pity. My mom works 2 jobs. College felt like an impossible dream. But you believed in me. Whoever you are, thank you for believing in me when no one else did." The video ended. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, tears streaming down my face. But they weren't tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated contentment. The front page stories, the public applause, the forced surrender of my mother, none of it mattered as much as this. This single, heartfelt thank you from a girl I would never meet. This was it. This was my real legacy. Not the medals on my chest, but the quiet impact I could have on a life, unseen and uncredited. I was my father's dim star, and I was finally guiding someone home. I turned to my laptop, the view of the Potomac River, a calm, steady presence outside my window. I opened a new, blank document. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. My fight was over, but I realized I had one more mission. I needed to tell this story. Not for fame, not for vindication, but for the other soldiers out there, for the forgotten sons and daughters, for anyone standing alone in their own arena, feeling invisible. My fingers found the keyboard. I typed the first words. They say home is where the heart is, but sometimes you have to leave home to find your heart again. That's my story, and I chose to tell it because I know I'm not the only one who has fought a battle in silence. Maybe your arena wasn't a ballroom, and maybe your critics weren't your family, but we all have our own struggles for recognition. Your story matters too. If my journey has resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for listening. You are not alone.